The full report into Downing Street lockdown parties is to be released in the next few days. A deadline for objections from those named has now passed, paving the way for civil servant Sue Gray's findings to be published.
The PM has always said that Sue Gray can take the report to wherever the evidence takes her. Sue Gray's doing this independently.
It'll come as pressure grows for government action on rising prices. One energy boss says many more households are heading into fuel poverty. Also tonight, the devastation caused by the war in Ukraine and the Russians willing to take the risk of speaking out. As of tomorrow, a new temporary timetable will cut ScotRail services by a third because of a driver shortage and pay dispute.
And I'll be live here at the Etihad, bringing you all the latest on what was an unforgettable final day of the Premier League season.
Good evening. The full report into parties in and around Downing Street while COVID restrictions were in place is set to be released within days after a deadline for objections from those involved passed earlier this evening. Sue Gray, the civil servant tasked with investigating the events, has gathered photographs as well as accounts of what happened, and some of those photographs are likely to be published. The report will come out as the government faces further calls to do more on the cost of living, with another energy company boss speaking out today. More on that in a moment, but first our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
Could Boris Johnson's political fate lie in the hands of a senior civil servant? Within days, Sue Gray's report into the lockdown gatherings in Downing Street is likely to be published. She met Boris Johnson last month, though Downing Street insists there was no attempt to influence the contents of her report. Labour are calling for all the evidence gathered by Sue Gray, including more than 500 photos and images of the events here at the heart of government, to be made public. And today, ministers insisted they were so hands-off that Sue Gray would be free to publish all the evidence she wished.
Sue Gray makes that decision. Sue Gray has complete control over this. I haven't seen the report. She will publish that report when she
But you'd welcome it?
It's right. I would absolutely welcome it. It's the right thing to do.
I understand that some of the evidence Sue Gray has won't be made public, but she'll use it to criticise some of her senior civil service colleagues. Those she intends to name were given until 5 o'clock today to respond. Her report could still be delayed if any of them take legal action, but Whitehall unions think this is unlikely.
Most of the people who are going to be named by Sue Gray have already been named in the media. So it would be pretty limited around the option for anyone wanting a significant challenge. You can't rule anything out, but I would be surprised if actually there are a large number of people going to be named. It's probably the most senior people who are involved in the issues that Sue's been investigating. And therefore, I'd be quite surprised if there was any grounds for any kind of legal challenge.
The fallout from so-called Partygate isn't limited to one party. Keir Starmer, currently under investigation by Durham police, has said he'd resign if they find he broke lockdown laws.
He's the former Director of Public Prosecutions. He takes adherence to the law extremely seriously. And if you contrast that to the culture that's been exposed both by what the Met's uncovered and by what we're likely to see in Sue Gray's report, you see that culture comes from the top.
And the expectation at Westminster is that Sue Gray's findings on Partygate are likely to be sobering. So where does all this leave the Prime Minister? Well, quite frankly, it looks like a lot of his senior officials are going to get it in the neck. Nonetheless, when we see the sheer detail of what went on behind Downing Street's black door, that could still be damaging for Boris Johnson. He's about to face an inquiry by a cross-party committee of MPs into whether he misled, or put bluntly, lied to Parliament. And then next month we have two crucial by-elections in Conservative-held seats where all this, the cost of living and other issues, will be raised by the voters. So it looks as though it may not be Sue Gray who has the final say on Partygate.
Ian, thank you very much. That's Ian Watson, live from Downing Street. Well, speaking of the cost of living, there was another call today for more action to protect the lowest income households from rising prices. The boss of one of the UK's biggest energy companies, E.ON, said that 40% of its customers could by October be in fuel poverty. That's when more than a tenth of your disposable income is spent on energy. Our business editor Simon Jack is here in the studio. Simon, this is not the first energy boss to have these kinds of words. Where is all of this heading?
I think we're heading for what is already a cost of living crisis into what energy bosses have told me. They've described it as horrific this October. We've already had that £700 rise in April, but the sun's out, houses are warm, people aren't using their heating as much. You've got another £700 rise expected in October, and the full force of that could hit when the nights are getting longer and colder. Now, the Treasury knows this and says it stands ready to do more than the £350 towards those bills that it's already done. The energy firms, like the E.ON boss today, they would like to see a big intervention, not least because they want to see that they get paid the bills that they're going to be presenting millions of customers who may struggle to pay. But the language so far from the Treasury suggests a more targeted approach, going to a more vulnerable customers. The big debate is going to be how to fund this. That's where the windfall tax argument comes in. Now, the Labour Party want it. Some members of the Conservative Party are also saying it, and some business leaders. Now, Boris Johnson says he doesn't instinctively like the idea, but he hasn't ruled it out. But given the severity, people may need to rethink that. The Treasury needs a way to not cave into Labour demands. So that's why you're hearing them talking about dialing up windfall taxes if there's no investment, dialing them down if there is investment, linking those two things. Very difficult to design that, but there's widespread acceptance that something has to be done to prevent what is already a crisis taking into a very nasty situation come the winter.
Simon, thank you very much. Simon Jack there, our business editor. Now, the BBC has gathered more accounts of suspected war crimes by Russian forces in Ukraine, including a group of 13 civilians near Kiev said to have been shot in the head. Moscow denies targeting civilians. And in Russia, even referring to the invasion of Ukraine as a war is a crime punishable with up to 15 years in prison. Our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford reports from Ukraine.
Walking through the ruins of Russia's war on its neighbour. Evidence of its cruelty in every crushed street and home. In every story of civilians targeted and killed. But Russia itself is silencing those facts, denying what's clear to see on the ground. And it's arresting those who still dare to speak out, even abroad.
The whole world sees what the Putin regime is doing to Ukraine. The cluster bombs on residential areas, the bombings of maternity wards and hospitals and schools, the war crimes. These are war crimes.
For that speech, Vladimir Karamurza is now facing 10 years behind bars. His wife already lives abroad for safety. Vladimir was poisoned twice in Russia and nearly died. But Yevgenia says he refused to be silenced.
He was charged basically for speaking the truth about the war and about the Russian army's atrocities committed in Ukraine.
With this war, Yevgenia tells me, the repression has only intensified.
Truth is actually the regime's main enemy. And this is why I believe this regime is using this law to squash all dissent in Russia and to scare people into silence.
This is the result of an all-out war. But in Russia, it's a crime to call it that. Or to criticize what was done here, as Vladimir Putin's army tried to seize Ukraine's capital. In Andriivka, we found a team from the UN collecting evidence of suspected war crimes. Stories that most Russians will never hear. The village elder told me 13 civilians were executed here, hands tied and shot in the head. And when I asked who they were, he listed the dead one by one.
Kibukevich Vitaly, Hanyuk Vadim, Ищенко Anton.
We didn't need protecting. Just look how they protected us. They killed so many people. I've got no words for it. They're swine.
All of this destruction, Russia's war on Ukraine, hasn't come from nowhere. Vladimir Putin has spent 2 decades dismantling democracy in his country, crushing his critics, silencing the free media, and now criminalizing the truth. eliminating all checks on his power to make this possible. But there are Russians resisting even now, like this reporter heading for a Ukrainian front line and seeing for herself the destruction caused by Russian bombs.
The war started. It was an immediate, I need to be there. I need to be there right now.
Lilia Yaparova writes for a website now blocked in Russia, like almost all independent news. But she's determined to go on reporting what the Kremlin doesn't want people to hear.
Do you think about the risk to you personally in the future?
Constantly, yeah. Yeah, constantly. It's difficult, it's disturbing. It hurts sometimes to write because I know that, yeah, I will say that for sure because I can't hide facts, but am I going to jail for that?
The risks are far higher for Ukrainians. That's clear on every street. But as war so devastates this country, in Russia, Vladimir Putin has declared war on truth itself. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Andreevka.
President Biden is in Tokyo to meet the prime ministers of Japan, Australia and India for the first such talk since the invasion of Ukraine, and amid ongoing concerns about China's territorial ambitions, particularly its claim on Taiwan. The build-up of the Chinese military has led to fears that it now has the ability to invade Taiwan and to defeat the US and its allies if they try to intervene. From Tokyo, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
Bilateral interoperability.
This is something that hasn't been seen since World War II. A fighter jet landing on board a Japanese aircraft carrier. Yes, Japan has an aircraft carrier, and soon it will have 40 of these jets to put on board. Japan is quietly abandoning pacifism, and the reason is simple: China. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is warning a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could be next.
A Taiwan emergency is an emergency for Japan and for the US-Japan alliance. President Xi Jinping should not make any mistake in recognizing this.
Just south of Tokyo, ships of the US 7th Fleet lie at anchor. For decades, these ships have guaranteed American domination of the Western Pacific, but not anymore.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has highlighted two very uncomfortable truths for the United States and its allies here in Asia. The first is that when China says it is determined to reunify Taiwan by force if necessary, it actually means it. The second is that if China did try and invade Taiwan, despite all of the impressive naval power on display here in Tokyo Bay, it's not clear at all whether the United States and its Japanese allies now have the ability to stop them.
For 20 years, China has been building a military force designed specifically to retake Taiwan and to defeat any US attempt to stop them.
I think whoever is in power in China, be it Xi Jinping or whomever comes after him, it is baked into the cake inside the Communist Party that China must get Taiwan back. It's impossible to see any leader stepping back from that position, and if they did step back from that position, they'd be out of a job.
As he arrived in Tokyo this evening, the challenge facing President Biden and his allies is how do they persuade President Xi Jinping that using force to take Taiwan would be as big a mistake as invading Ukraine has been for President Putin. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
Female television presenters in Afghanistan have begun appearing on air with their faces covered after the Taliban brought in new rules. Women who would previously have covered their hair have started to obscure part of their faces a day after some defied the order to cover up fully in public. One executive said many female presenters feared the next stage would be to take them off air completely. The UK Health Security Agency says more cases of monkeypox are being detected on a daily basis, with around 20 in total so far here, but that the risk to the general population is extremely low. Israel, Switzerland and Austria are the latest countries to report that they've discovered cases. The illness caused by monkeypox is typically mild for adults. The 5-year anniversary of the Manchester Arena terror attack has been commemorated with a day of remembrance in the city for the 22 people who lost their lives. A minute's silence was held at Manchester Piccadilly rail station, and the victims were honoured with applause at the start of the Great Manchester Run. Church bells are about to ring out at 10:31 tonight, which is the exact time of the explosion at the end of an Ariana Grande concert. A drastically reduced rail timetable comes into force in Scotland tomorrow due to a shortage of drivers and a pay dispute between the newly nationalised ScotRail and the ASLEF union. Around 700 daily services, which is a third of the normal number, will be cut. Many drivers are refusing to work overtime until the pay row is resolved. Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
Many rely on the rail network, but the new temporary timetable means a significant cut to services.
There's two reasons for this. The first is that the pandemic meant we couldn't train enough drivers. That's resulted in a driver shortage. And the second issue is that ASLEF, the train drivers union, is in dispute with us over pay. That's meant fewer drivers are making themselves available for overtime and for rest days, and that's resulted in cancellations for our customers, which have been unacceptable.
From tomorrow, the last train from Edinburgh to Glasgow Queen Street, which is usually at 23:45, will leave at 22:15. If you're travelling from Glasgow to Dundee, the last train was at 23:10. That changes to 19:10. For the Glasgow to Mallaig train, the last one was at 18:21. That now leaves around lunchtime. And some services have already been affected.
We checked last night, the train was still running, and we've come in today and they've cancelled it today because there's not enough drivers.
Unfortunately, our Allowood train has been cancelled, so we've had to get a refund on our tickets.
I will probably choose not to take the train in the future. I will just plan to take the bus instead of the train.
The reduced timetable is likely to impact Scotland's World Cup playoff against Ukraine here at Hampden on the 1st of June. The Scottish Conservatives have called on ScotRail to lay on extra trains for thousands of fans. The Scottish Government has said that plans are being worked up for events like this one. Alongside this disruption, rail workers are to be balloted on strike action over pay.
Every one of us is facing a cost of living crisis. We've seen our council tax, our water, our sewerage, our gas, electricity, food all going up, our fuel, everyone. We have a standard living and we're trying to maintain that for our membership.
ScotRail said the temporary timetable would provide more certainty, but it will take some time for more drivers to be trained. So the next few weeks could be challenging. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News, Glasgow.
And now to what was a dramatic afternoon of football as the Premiership title was decided. Let's join Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes for the detail of all the action. Lizzie.
Thank you, Mishal. Good evening. Yes, we are starting, of course, with the football and a dramatic end to the Premier League season. All the goals are on Match of the Day. But here comes the news, if you didn't already know, that Manchester City have won the title, their fourth in 5 years. Our correspondent Andy Swiss reports on an extraordinary final day.
This day is Manchester City's.
Well, it might have ended in delight, but boy, was there drama on the way. City had begun knowing if they slipped up against Aston Villa, Liverpool could snatch the title. And for 75 minutes, that seemed very possible. Villa led 2-0. City could scarcely believe it. But with time running out, what a comeback. A goal from Rodri and 2 from İlkay Gündoğan, and City's agony had turned to ecstasy. Although Liverpool beat Wolves 3-1, it ultimately wasn't enough. City's 3-2 win sparking the week's latest pitch invasion after pipping their rivals to glory.
Never ever in my life have I found a team like Liverpool. They are a fantastic team, we are a fantastic team, and unfortunately we got a little bit more points than them, and that's why we are the champion.
Well, what an emotional roller coaster these fans have been through, but finally City can celebrate after a quite extraordinary day.
I've been supporting him for all my life since I was a 4-year-old. I'm just over the moon.
If you win the hard way, then it's all the more enjoyable, and City always do it the hard way.
They certainly did that. A day of tears, triumph, and for City, yet another title. Andy Swiss, BBC News at the Etihad Stadium.
Well, our sports editor Dan Roan is at the Etihad. Dan, where does this title rank in City's increasingly long list of achievements?
I think it's right up there, Lizzie. I mean, City were widely expected to prevail today, but few, if any, could have predicted the unforgettable manner in which they eventually did so. It is highly impressive, I think, the way that Pep Guardiola's side have bounced back from the disappointment a few weeks ago in the Champions League. This victory really underlining their relentless spirit and resolve when you consider the way that Liverpool were snapping at their heels in recent weeks. A fourth Premier League title in 5 seasons, well, that's something which only Sir Alex Ferguson down the road at Manchester United has managed to achieve in the Premier League era. No doubt there'll be some, given that, who fear that City's huge financial resources are making them too dominant. But on the other hand, of course, Liverpool match them almost stride for stride and have the chance of a cup treble if they can win the Champions League final next weekend in Paris. This, the latest chapter in what's becoming, of course, a classic rivalry between the two clubs. Sadly, City's celebrations were somewhat marred by this incident when the Aston Villa goalkeeper, Robin Olsen, appeared to be struck as he tried to leave the pitch amid what is the latest example in a recent spate of pitch invasion. City have apologised to him. They've said that they'll ban the fan. They've launched an investigation in what was otherwise a day to cherish when City retained their Premier League title in unforgettable fashion.
Thank you, Dan. Well, the other big win at the top of the table was Tottenham securing the final Champions League place. But at the other end, heartbreak for Burnley, who were relegated to the Championship. They were beaten by Newcastle, while a win for Leeds meant they survived. Max Verstappen is top of the F1 drivers' standings after being gifted victory in the Spanish Grand Prix. Title rival Charles Leclerc was forced to retire with engine failure. Then Red Bull team orders meant Sergio Perez gave way for Verstappen to take the win. Britain's George Russell and Lewis Hamilton were 3rd and 5th. Scottish runner Eilish McColgan set a new British and European 10K record at the Great Manchester Run today. She finished just behind Kenya's Helen Obiri in 30 minutes 19 seconds, shaving 2 seconds off Paula Radcliffe's record that had stood for nearly 2 decades. That's it. The latest from the final day of the USPGA is on the BBC Sport website. Back to you, Mishal.
Lizzie, thank you very much. And that's all from us now on BBC One The News, wherever you are. Good night.